Good evening, how are we all? I have window in the wrong place. Let's just move that over there. There we go. There's only one picture of me roller skating, which Claire shared on Discord somewhere. I only fell over 3 times, it wasn't too bad. We ended up playing roller skate tag, which was quite fun. Hey, Zaf. Right, let's get all my windows organised. It's 8 PM here in the UK. That would be quite funny, AJ, yeah. I was actually doing really well for quite some time, but then when we started chasing after each other, I just kept falling over. I'm better at ice skating, to be fair. So just a quick update on what I have done since getting back from our trip. I added the usual grill around the lighting fixture. That's the ceiling cavity, so all the HVAC will be coming down through there. I've just started finalizing some of the panels around here. I couldn't for the life of me work out how I was going to do the interface between the wall and the ceiling, and in the end I've kind of come up with this weird little hook on the end of the panel, but I haven't been able to arrange the panels in any other way that makes sense, so we're just going to have to live with a weird little hook on the end of this panel, and I think they could probably do with some inset lights as well. It's a little bit dark around the edges there, so I'll probably put a couple of lights either side, and then obviously the main light in the middle, which still needs doing. I started working on the grill for that one. It just needs the main bars going round. That needs turning into a proper light, and I'm going to have that bit there essentially mirror this bit here, so we'll have the same raised light that will just end, probably end in line with the wall there somewhere, and that's where it just kind of joins the rest of that circular bit. I think I would prefer if the ceiling had more verticality to it. I mean, I've tried to kind of, indent bits where I can, just to make it a little bit more three-dimensional. It doesn't really look it when you look at it from the side anyway, but it just feels so flat. It feels like it needs something. But I'll add the usual bolts and things holding it all on, and add a bit more detail, and see whether or not that that adds that's something that's missing. I think I'm also going to round off these corners, so I'll just have a separate just bit of white paneling there. I originally just went with the square, but I don't like how sort of lined up all that is. I think there definitely needs to be a curved edge there. Yeah, it could do. I was thinking of putting that on the front of the security desk, so it will just say B deck, VIP and administration, something like that, and then security underneath. Yep, true enough. But yeah, we'll raise this light up in the middle here as well. So again, that will be like these ones. It will have a certain amount of vertical detail to it. Yeah, well, we actually have about, because this is the deck above, so we've got about this much height to play with. So in actual fact, the cavity above B deck is bigger than all the other decks. It's quite large, so we do have a lot of room to go up. And at some point, I might actually experiment with having a much higher ceiling on this section, but for now, it can stay as it is. I've also changed something over the past day or so, which has messed up the lighting. Another bug to fix. It's complaining about virtual shadows, but like none of these should be casting virtual shadows. Unless it's classing or including megalights within the virtual shadow map cache. Didn't think it did that. But that does seem to have fixed it. Ish. Weird. But anyway. Yeah, so I was hoping to spend the past week working on the project in the evenings, but where I was staying had absolutely no internet whatsoever, so I couldn't even pull the project. So yeah, I was basically forced to drink and enjoy myself. Oh well. Anywho, we're not working on the Magellan tonight, we're working on the Caravella. And I was thinking it would be good to start routing some of the actual cabling and plumbing for the bits of hardware, because I don't want to fall into the trap of starting to flesh out the rooms and things, and then realise after the fact that I haven't got room for running some critical hardware. So I guess as you do with a real vessel, you do the hardware first, and then you kind of fit the rooms around the hardware. So we'll give that a pop and see how we get on. Oh yeah, it was awful. Yeah, I had to drink and I had to play games. It was hell. Yeah, so a couple of streams back, we started having a look just roughly at where the main power run needs to go, which is how we got kind of this arrangement going on. I also did some math, and I worked out how big the reactor needs to be for a given field size. So let's just see if I can find my spreadsheet now. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so I've got this like chunk of a spreadsheet, which is just like all the stuff that I'm fiddling with and just messing about with math-wise. I just keep adding it to this spreadsheet, which is getting longer and longer and longer. Yeah, so this was it. So the Caravella FTL ring. So if we take the size of the field, which is at the moment, I guess, 45 meters in diameter. So what's that? So that's 22.5 meters radius. So it is going to be a bit bigger than this. I think once we stretch the sides out a little bit, because we need to make slightly more room down the edge here for some windows. Yeah, we might not need to make the ring bigger, but I think if we work on the principle of adding maybe 2.25 meters, maybe that as our field width. to give us a bit more room to work with, then that's going to be a nice easy 25 meters radius. So if we pop that into here, so we've got 25 meter radius, which means the size of the plasma cube is 1.84 meters. That's along each edge. Yes, so that's cubic. No, that can't be cubic. Got myself confused now. No, it's all good, Claire. This is nothing critical. This is all my napkin math. Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. So that can't be centimeters. So that must be... yeah, along the edge. So I'm trying to go at the edge of the cube. So yeah, so that means we need a 1.84 by 1.84 by 1.84 cube. So I think the reactor size we have is probably actually slightly too big. Although it's not far off. So basically that's the volume of plasma that we have to work with. Because we worked out... thank you, yeah. Which is not far off that, to be honest. Yeah, because it was something like 1.5 centimeters cubed per watt, or per 100 watts. I think it's 100 watts. Yeah, per 100 watts. Yeah, so I'm just making sure in my head that the math's right. Yeah, so for every 100 watts of energy, the fusion reaction requires 1 centimeter cubed of plasma, which is what this calculation here is. So along each edge of the cube is 1.84 meters. So that definitely gives us that size for our plasma containment. So the idea with the reactor is it's a pulsed fusion reactor. I've forgotten a bunch of the stuff that I was researching because other things enter my brain and it pushes out original information. But we're looking at a field reversed configuration plasma. I think it was tri-alpha energy, I think the reactor we were looking at. So basically it does 2 plasma formations at each end of the reactor. It fires them into the middle there, and then that collision is held in a spin state. So there's a bunch of neutral beam injectors around it which induces spin, and that basically heats it up and causes fusion to happen. So we know that we need this much plasma in order to generate, or rather to keep the field running for 1 second. There's no particular tolerance, it just kind of is what it is. Yes, Kachi, definitely, because the other thing we need obviously is things like weapons and shields. So we want to make sure, I mean, that this would be the minimum amount of plasma being fused per second in order to keep the FTL running, but then of course we have everything else on the ship that also needs power. So in order to come up with the full power calculation, we need to know at peak usage, with absolutely everything drawing power, how much plasma do we need in order to sustain that. And given that that much is for the FTL, to be honest, a reactor of this size isn't far off. I think we're pretty much in the ballpark of how big it needs to be, which is good. Means we don't have to make the room larger. Yeah, so one of the difficult things from a gameplay perspective, or from a drama perspective, is that things like life support and lighting use such a minuscule amount of power versus something like the shields or the FTL or the artificial gravity, that they almost become irrelevant. So, you know, you see it on TV where like the reactor's failing and all the lights suddenly start dimming, but you know, given like ultra efficient LED panels and the amount of power the ship would be generating, if it's generating so little power that the lights are dimming, then there would be literally no power for anything on the ship. Like, you could barely turn on a microwave. So it's just this is massive discrepancy in power requirements between different systems. So it's difficult to build drama into that. So, you know, when the ship takes damage and systems are being damaged, it's difficult to have the lights turn off and explain that happening by way of loss of power, because there is such an excess amount of power available in the system that there's never going to be not enough for the light bulbs. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, so transferring power from the lighting and life support to weaponry is like peeing into the wind. It's not helpful. Thank you, Sophie. Very much appreciated. But anyway, yeah, we will try and come up with some dramatic way of things failing in ways which are visually interesting. I think just having things take literal damage is probably the only way we can do that. Right, so we got as far as doing our main power. Now we also need fuel and coolant lines coming into this, and we were kind of building that underneath the belly there. I'm not completely okay with this. I think I'm struggling to make it fit in a way that doesn't look ridiculous. hang on, it's stuck in a ship somewhere. What am I stuck in? There we go. Yeah, so having that stuck underneath like that, it's going to be difficult to fit what we need to fit, and also provide access to the crew, and also have it narrow enough that we're going to be able to like blend it into the hull smoothly. It's really going to mess with the sort of the sleek smoothness of the hull. So I might need to maybe move some of the tankage to the back here, because there is, behind the cargo bay, there's a lot of kind of empty space there, so we might be able to move some of that to there. Yeah, the only other thing we could do is maybe have just have some extra vertical height just down below there, not to the extent that it's an entirely full deck, just have a bit of a lump, more than so not something that's like not something you can stand up in, but just enough that it gives us a bit more room for tankage. And yeah, as Anasi just pointed out, we also need the ram scoop underneath there as well, so that could be on the leading edge of this. So in actual fact, we could probably get away with something more akin to that. Or maybe not quite that, maybe something more like that. And it can also be narrower as well, if we're not having to worry about crew access. So if we bring that in by, say, 1 meter, and then that one, makes it much easier to join that up to everything. And she's probably going to have 4 main decks, and then maybe a half sub deck. But in terms of deck numbering, definitely 4. We do have up on, where are we? On deck 2, we've got some really quite large engineering spaces either side of the upper part of the reactor room. Now, I was reserving these for life support, water recycling, all that sort of stuff. But to be honest, the rooms are so big that we could probably squeeze all of that onto one side and then have the other side for something else. I don't quite know what the something else would be yet, but yeah, we'll have to have a think on that. And yes, and some refinery hardware as well. We might have to see that might actually be something we put in here. So we will have our engineering lift coming up this section here. So we do actually have the means to move cargo up there fairly easily. But it's going to be limited. So again, the idea of this ship is it's not like the Magellan, which is designed literally as a city in space that can support itself fully. This is more of a scout vessel. It can look after itself, but only to a limited extent. So it's not going to be as capable as the Magellan in terms of long-term survivability. But we want at least something on there to keep it running. Yeah, we were talking about the crew the other day, and I think we may have to double bunk some of these rooms. And I was also thinking about the brig as well, because we weren't actually going to have a brig at all. And the rationale for that would be that the crew would just be confined to quarters if that were needed. But from a gameplay perspective and a multiplayer perspective, we do use the brig as our muting and banning space for people that you don't want causing issues on your ship. So I think we're going to have to include a brig anyway, just so that we make sure that every part of the game's systems are catered for on every vessel. So we're going to need a brig on every single ship in order to deal with people that are, messing about on your server. So in practical terms, a brig is required. Yeah, force them to go up and down the lift all day. Yeah. Yeah, this ship is way smaller than Voyager. The Magellan's about the same size as Voyager, but this one is like literally one of the Magellan's engine pods. It's tiny. I say tiny. I mean it's not a small ship, but in the grand scheme of things, it's tiny. Yes, we've got these rooms at the back here, which at the moment we were using as crew quarters, but we can extend them all the way across, which is not necessarily a terrible idea. So we don't have... We'd lose some access to engineering through the hatch I was going to put there, but it does give us some slightly bigger rooms, which means we could use one of those as the engineering office, which means I get the whole having the windows overlooking the reactor. And I did do it down on deck 3 there, having the windows looking at the reactor, but I really wanted them to be above it instead, and that does give us that, but that does also take away from having an engineering corridor, so we'll continue to ruminate on that idea. This is all part of the fun of designing a starship. You keep coming up with things you need and then have to try and make space for it somewhere. That's awesome, Sophie. I'm glad to hear it. And hopefully it's just going to get better and better over time. Like a fine wine. Right, yeah, so power. So I mentioned a couple of streams back that I was using spline-based pipes and cables to draw out where all the cables and things were going. And I wanted to experiment with doing it in SketchUp instead. So rather than having dynamically placed meshes, we'd actually go with having a physically modelled mesh instead. So I don't have to spend time drawing them out all over the ship. I can literally just copy paste them and model them in SketchUp, and then just export them accordingly. It's basically, it swings and roundabouts, because doing it via splines takes longer, but it means that we don't have asset bloat. We just have one single asset for doing the pipe or the cable, and then we just duplicate that asset and draw the spline as required. There are issues with splines as well. Just usual spline mesh stretching and bending and twisting and that sort of thing you got to cope with, and you can never really get proper straight nice lines with them. They're always quite organic. Whereas in SketchUp everything's precise and millimeter accurate, which I always like. And it's quicker. So it's like, do we want the asset bloat where we've got like 101 different cable assets, or do we have a single asset which is a little bit bendy, a little bit unreliable, but ultimately, yeah. So I'll try it on the Magellan and see how we get on. Sorry, try it on the Caravella manually and see whether or not that's better or worse than splines. So when it comes to the cable runs... Oh, T-Shane, wow. Thank you. Stopping to say hi, gonna go outside. So we're at 28 degrees here in California. Wow. 28C, that's mad. That's way too hot for me. I like anything over like 24, I'm too hot. How was the birthday dinner? It was amazing, thank you. Yes, really enjoyed my birthday. It was very nice. We went for a Chinese buffet, which is one of my favourites. Yes, thank you. Very cool. Yeah, so if we look at the Magellan a sec. So every light will have a cable which comes from the top and down the wall. And then where the panel is, you'll basically see that drop down into the cavity. And where the main, I guess you could call it the trunk cable, comes running around from the distributor. So they're not here at the moment, but the distributor for, which is this is the aft section. So the distributor box here, which is behind all the wall screens, basically drop its cable down and run around like this, up and over the door frame, and it'll go all the way around. So you'll have little junction boxes all the way along this big fat cable that comes through here that the ceiling panel is going to plug into, and we'll have it so that the cable will be part of the ceiling panel actor, so there will be basically one object. But because we need to put little junction boxes all the way around, really that means that the length of the cable is from one junction to the next. So I guess the same as like in a household circuit, the maximum length of a cable is usually between two wall sockets, because you're cutting it, terminating it, putting a block on it, and then there's another run of cable going to the next wall socket. So we would need separate cables for each segment of corridor, but that actually works in our favor because it means that we can copy paste those around the arc of the circle. So maybe not so much on C deck, because it's got some weirdly shaped corridor pieces, but say down here on C deck, each of these segments is the same size, so we can have the same size cable and the same curvature for each segment, and then just copy paste those cables around. So when it comes to damaging them, we would then use probably a combination of a separate damage mesh and some kind of procedural damage, probably material driven, so we'll use some kind of noise function, maybe do negative tessellation, so we'll have like exposed wires and things on the inside of the mesh, and if we add negative tessellation to the rubber sheath, then that rubber sheath will go inward rather than outward and expose the cables therein. And if that's driven by a noise function, then each cable gets unique looking damage, which is different from the rest. So you won't get a situation where you see a run of damaged cables and you'll have the exact same damage mesh on them, which is just really immersion breaking. So I have plans for that. Yeah, so the way to think on it, again, if I pull a panel off, whoop, so you would have the cable that runs, I guess, from the hole that we will drill through here. So we'll have like rubber seals on all of this, because every single cavity is supposed to be a pressure vessel. So once these bulkhead doors are closed, then this corridor becomes a pressure vessel in its own right. And the same with the rooms. All the rooms are their own pressure vessels. So anywhere where we push a cable through, we'll seal it with a rubber seal. So from this edge to this edge, that becomes one actor, one solid object. And that will have a connector on it, which, like this wall panel here, will speak to. So this ceiling panel, rather, is dependent on this single bit of cable here. So if this single bit of cable loses voltage, then the light will turn off. And then we can just apply damage to that one actor that's in there. And then if that's damaged, then you need to pull the panel off, either try and fix it in place, which will reduce its quality, or just rip it out and put a new one in, which you would 3D print. They are spurs, AJ. Oh, now you're asking me. So the whole circuit, I guess the way to look at it is the cables are self-contained, so that they have both the outward and inward path, the positive and negative, within the same cable. So otherwise we'd need double the amount of cable actors on the ship, which is just cable overload. So I don't have a diagram to hand, but essentially you start off with a reactor, and that goes to distribution boxes, and then each distribution box then goes to a smaller distribution box, and we're stepping down the voltage as we go. So if you imagine it like I suppose it's more like a hub and spoke network than a traditional ring main, if that makes sense. Essentially, it's a daisy chain of distribution boxes, and the further away from the reactor you get, the more the voltage is stepped down, until you get to what is essentially a ring main, which then just powers the lights and things. But that ring main is a single cable that has the outward and inward path within that solid single cable. Yeah, so the lighting ring, or the lighting run as it is, you'll have the distribution box in the corridor, which is what you see on the Magellan. So when you turn off the lights from the Magellan, it's removing power to that one cable that has all the lights daisy chained along it. Yeah, probably, Max. Yes, exactly that. So everything works like downstream of the reactor. So if you were to destroy one of the junction boxes, then everything downstream of that junction box will then be without power. So it is, if you imagine like big chunky cables, they go into a distribution box, and that distribution box has less chunky cables to multiple distribution boxes, which in turn have even smaller cables and even more distribution boxes, and you just get smaller cables and more distribution boxes the further and further you get from the reactor, until you get to an individual corridor, which basically just has a breaker box and a bunch of wires going off to lights and doors and things. We will have 3D diagrams of that on the holo display at some point, so you'll see like certain runs of cable flashing red because they have no power, you know, that sort of thing. Very much like the damage control display from the Passengers movie. I really like how they did that in 3D, so we'll do something similar. Yes, we will have heat damage. In fact, I even did all the code for the heat damage already. It's not enabled right now, but yes. So if as a cable degrades and as it takes damage, its resistance goes up. And obviously the higher the resistance, the more it's increasing the amperage, because you're having to pull more power across it to maintain the hardware. So that then generates more heat, and then you get this kind of loop until the cable heats up and burns out and damages. So things like resistance are already part of the calculation on the electrical sim. So that all the background code for that's been done. We just haven't added the bit of code that causes the damage in the first place. So once we start actually adding damage to the cable, then things like resistance are already modeled. So all we need to do is just turn up the resistance value as we take damage, and the whole system will just react organically to that, because again, the higher the resistance on the cable, the more power we're trying to pull across it in order to maintain those systems. Yeah, it's difficult to have like instant effects because the entire electrical system has a 1 Hertz tick. So basically every second we are checking certain points along the run and updating things where they need to be updated. So electrically, it can only ever update its state once per second, which means that if you, for example, go to FTL, in order to have the lights flicker and dim, we would probably have to drive that through an artificial event rather than a direct impact on the electrical system, because the electrical system isn't going to react to any changes until a second later because of the 1 Hertz update speed. If that makes sense. Yeah, so every component, every cable, every panel, all of it's going to be damageable. And if anything is destroyed, you will need to 3D print a replacement. That is the only way of fixing it. But yes, so the simulation will be as deep as individual cables will affect anything downstream of that cable. If it's a short, then that will have an upstream effect, because obviously you're then blowing breakers back up the line. But generally speaking, most of it's just happening downstream. So again, where you take damage matters, because if you're taking damage on some of the higher voltage supply cables, then obviously there's a lot of downstream equipment of those cables, so a lot more stuff is affected. Whereas if you take damage in a corridor, then literally only that corridor is going to be affected. You might lose the lights and some doors, but you're not going to like lose life support or anything like that. Right, let's try and get some stuff done, shall we? So our reactor needs coolant and fuel, and I think we'll stick with having it under the floor like we've got here, and again we'll extend that down slightly into more of a well kind of beneath the deck there, just so that we can make some of these tanks bigger to hold a bit more coolant and fuel. So that sorts that out. We'll split use some of the rooms either side of the reactor here. So one side's definitely going to be life support, and like water recycling and sewerage handling and that sort of thing. And then yeah, I think the other side's going to have to be a refinery. I don't think there's any way really of avoiding that, because we need that refinery ability within the ship in order for it to replenish its stocks of resources for things like the 3D printers. So again, when you're out and about, if you're taking damage and things are being destroyed, then there's going to be a resource cost for 3D printing replacement parts. And if all the bins are dry, then your only recourse is to go out there and mine some replacement materials so that you can then 3D print the things you need to fix the main ship. Obviously that's a fair ways off yet, but we need to prepare for it now. Yeah, a one-to-one replica would be very cool. Yeah, so doors will, once we have the ability to open them without power, they will default to closed when unpowered. Right now, they open when they're unpowered because we have no way of opening them. We don't want players to get stuck in rooms, so that's just a mechanic thing that we added to stop people getting stuck places. Just thinking about breaker box locations. Hey, Zopbox. We're looking at plumbing and wiring today. So I want to start actually mapping out where the physical hardware needs to go. So we know roughly what room's going to be used for what. But then we also need to think about how we're actually routing that stuff. It is indeed. So like we need our main electrical distribution frame, which I'm thinking might actually be worth putting in the engineering office. Like in a real world ship, the engineering control room generally has the main electrical bus. So like behind all their screens and things, they've got like a big wall of electrical switches. So it might be worth emulating that and sticking it along this back wall here. It's not out of the question. Our main battery room is actually all the way up on deck 1 at the back here. So we need... Yes, we need our aggregators for the batteries. Now we could maybe put some of that on the wall in the stairwell. I guess we're going to be using the stairwell quite heavily for cable runs. Pretty much that's the only place we've got engineering access to where we can run all of the utilities. Yeah, so let's make a box on here. So we have autosave. Right, so if we were to do a box there for, let's say that's the aggregator for the batteries. But we also need a distributor for the batteries as well. And I suppose there's no reason why they can't go next to each other. we can have both of those there. I will do, yeah. I'll also start color coding it as well once I've kind of worked out in my head where everything's going. Because we need a high voltage distribution frame for the reactor, which I guess can go in the reactor room itself. Let's get this on a different layer a minute. Really looking forward to seeing this when it's all when all the hardware has been routed, so we can see the ship like with no decks and no skin. So it's literally just all the hardware and wires and things. I think that's going to look particularly cool. Separating these objects out so that they are in separate layers. Just so we can see where we're at with it all. It's a good idea, Kaji. I'll make him an engineer. Chief Engineer Bryce. Okay, yeah, so if we're having that just as an additional well underneath where we can fit some tanks, then it doesn't actually need to go as far back as the stairwell. It can only go back as far as the wall. Just makes that lump even less intrusive. Okay, so if I start color coding green as coolant, I suppose blue is better for coolant, isn't it? So we'll do deuterium, helium-3. I guess we're using something more like argon for the RCS. Yeah, I think the tanks need to be generally pressure vessel shaped. I think I can't remember which one it is. Certain cryofluids need to be kept under fairly high pressure in order to remain cryofluids. I can't remember which now off the top of my head, but I think that is a thing. I'm not going to be like crazy detailed with this yet. I'm just getting an idea for where things need to go. Yeah, the solar array is just going to be solar panels. So we'll have them extend out from somewhere. Maybe the inside of the ring. So just face the ship towards the star. So the ring's facing towards the star. And then the solar panels will fold out. And that's your emergency power, basically. Yeah, every source of fluid will have a pump, and that will be a single circulation pump. So these tanks will need pump hardware associated with them as well. Hence the need for a bit more room. They're also going to need chillers as well. Actually, let's borrow one from here. No, I do the UV unwrapping in Unreal, although I used to use a third-party tool for it, and I can't for the life of me remember what it's called now. It's been such a long time since I used it, but it was really, really good at handling UV unwraps. All we export from SketchUp is literally just the raw geometry with some texture groups. That's it. Nothing more. Right, let's call this a pump. Yes, things like force fields will definitely require a lot of power. Actually, let's color code these differently. Right, so the blue ones are pumps. Right, so we've got 2 fuels and coolant running up into the reactor. To be fair, the coolant tank can be the smaller of the 3. So we'll make 2 big fuel tanks and a smaller fuel coolant tank. Each of these is going to require a chiller, and that will feed the cryo fluid back into said tank. They're also going to need returns as well, so let's pop them across there. And they also need overflows, actually, while we're doing it. Let's just stick them in the middle for now. Align that properly in a moment. These tanks alongside of the RCS, they may be a little bit overkill, to be honest. But yeah, so you've got a similar thing. Actually, we're going to need the pump hardware. So same deal as the other ones, really. You've got the chillers, and the chillers take fuel from the main gas feed, condense it into liquid like cryofuels, which get stored as cryo liquids, and then those cryo liquids get pumped out via the pumps to where they are needed, be it well, in this case, the RCS thrusters. So we'd have the same thing over on this side as well. Probably yes, Anasi. I think we'll just use argon in both instances. All we're doing is turning it into plasma and accelerating it very, very quickly out of a nozzle. So yeah, it's just something inert and non-explosive. The biggest explosive thing we have is the deuterium tank. Exactly, AJ. Yeah. Yeah, so each tank's obviously going to be outgassing the whole time, because cryo things don't stay cryo things. So they'll need to be outgassing back into the chiller, which then feeds the cryo liquid back into the tank. We then have the return from the reactor loop that goes into the chiller, and again gets dumped back into there. And then while I think on it, we also need the refueling loop, which also goes into the chiller. So we need three pipes input into each one, and then one output. These are the tanks, Kushcat. So what we're building right now is the tanks and the pipe work to manage that infrastructure. Obviously right now it is very rough, but we're just roughing it in so that we know what we need room for, what things fit, what things don't fit, and then if things don't fit in a bad way, then we'll have to rejig the decks a little bit to make room for things. What I said when I first started with this is that again, I don't want to fall into the trap that we had with the Magellan a little bit, where we are fitting engineering systems around the interior of the ship. We want that to be very much the other way around, where we are we're building the ship around the hardware. So it's a hardware first design. Okay, so the refueling pipes, which is these three, I guess really need to come down from below, because this is where the fuel scoop's going to be. So when we're ploughing through the upper atmosphere of a gas giant, those gases that we're collecting go into these pipes. So we'll have a switch on the ram scoop that basically, if you think of it as like an electrical sieve, so it is capturing certain atoms based on their electrical charge, so it's able to filter out different atoms. It's like a filter scoop basically, and then they get shoved down these pipes into the chillers, and then the chillers condense it to liquid, and that goes into the tank for storage. So that's basically the whole refueling loop there. And then those as commodities, as liquid commodities, then get pumped out via the pumps into where they need to be. in this case the reactor. So yeah, so anything that doesn't match the filter, it just gets pooped back out the back. So there'll be a vent out the back, so it'll be sucking in clouds essentially, and then pooping out any that are not relevant. So we'll need pipes from there up into here as well. So we just need to make sure that we've got access to that. And also access into the engine pods. So we're going to have fuel tanks in the engine pods themselves, because there literally is nowhere else to put them. We just do not have the room. Fortunately, it's just argon, so it's not exactly anything explosive or damaging. Just going to lift that up a little bit so I can rotate it. Again, this is all very rough for now. Yeah, the storage bins for the 3D printers will be different. We'll either store things as pellets or, as you say, just a gas canister for gaseous materials, because each thing you 3D print is going to have a list of resources that's required. So it'll have, say, like 10% carbon, 3% titanium, that sort of thing. And it will just then draw from those bins. Now, obviously, there are a lot of trace elements in any kind of thing that you would 3D print. So we're just going to focus on the main things. We don't want a list of like 30 component ingredients for an item. We'll try and narrow that down a bit. Yeah, exactly, AJ. And what we don't want is, an entire periodic table's worth of tanks to store individual atoms. We will, we'll simplify that in some way. Not quite sure to what extent that will simplify that, but I think a lot of things that you would be 3D printing would be predominantly made of a lot of single components. So like if you're printing out a new cable, like most of it's going to be the copper or silver or something. I think silver was the best conductor, wasn't it? So it's basically going to be like 90% metal and then maybe 10% rubber, like some synthetic rubber. Synthetic. Why can't I say the word synthetic? And if you're printing out a circuit board, it's going to be like silicon, like very heavy in silicon, and a few other trace elements. So we'll try and discard elements that are largely irrelevant, or that they're always included in such trace amounts as to be not worth including. Yeah, generic conductive metal. I think we'll go a bit deeper than that, but yeah, not to the extent of the entire periodic table. That would be overkill somewhat. Yeah, so there's going to be a fair bit of pipe work for these, and we're going to need, because if we're going with like multiple standard tanks, then each tank's going to require a return feed, and it's also going to require a manifold, so that all of these are grouped together into a single feed for the pump. That's going to be an interesting one. I might component that up so that we can mirror the work to the other side as well. Yeah, well, that's true. We do need the element that was discovered that makes FTL possible. And again, the science behind that is that the whole mass energy equivalence thing, it throws that on its head, in that it gives you a lot more mass for a lot less energy. So for things like FTL drives that need to generate a lot of virtual mass in order to compress space, you need less input energy for the same virtual mass. So it's basically a really ultra efficient version of V equals mc squared. So this material that we've discovered is what makes that possible. So when you channel energy through it, the field that it generates has like an extreme amount of virtual mass. It's also what we use for artificial gravity. Why don't I stick some labels on them? That would help, wouldn't it? Oh, auto save. Of course. Yeah, I don't think this is working. Like every time I type a label, it disappears or stays on my screen. I can't add labels. Otherwise I would. But yeah, so you got coolant and helium-3 and deuterium. Those are all the fuel and coolant supplies for the reactor. Obviously the reactor also has need of a capacitor room, and I think we might have to sacrifice some of these lower crew quarters that we were going to include, because if we're going to dual bunk some of the crew quarters, then we can use these rooms for hardware. We are we're really cramming things in space-wise. Yeah, we went with a double deuterium tank just because the neutral beam injectors were also using deuterium. But I need to look at the math again on the fusion equation to see the exact ratio. Ultimately, yes, you need a dedicated chiller for each one, because obviously, if you've got gaseous helium flowing into this chiller, then you're chilling that down into liquid helium, but you can't then pump deuterium through it, because now you've got helium and deuterium mixed into sort of a a mixed fluid. So you need to keep the chillers separate, otherwise they'll be contaminated. I'm going to add these into that group, and then if we get rid of these for a minute, it will allow us to mirror what we're doing. But not with that one, obviously. Oh look, I did start making pumps. Past me, put them in the same place as present me. Yeah, so the engineering accesses the chillers from there, which means we need to make sure that the pipes can fit. Just the RCS, Oni. And to be honest, they're probably a little bit on the large side for what we need. So we can likely condense that down a little bit, but ultimately yes. And I think in order to fit the pipes in, we'll make the tanks themselves a bit smaller. Yeah, because ideally those pipes need to run along this back wall here. And we need some space above in order to capture the venting gas. The RCS will be the same as the sublight engines, so it will be plasma rockets essentially. So argon accelerated to not quite superluminal, but almost relativistic speeds. Coolant. So the RCS thrusters will need cooling down, given that they're going to be running very, very hot. Yes, so the RCS thrusters will have their own coolant supplies, and they're independent as well. So the RCS on one side of the ship has its own separate supply to the RCS on the other. So we're not cross-feeding between the two. Although, if we can get some cabling and relevant valves situated, then cross-feeding would be nice if we could do that, because it means that if you take damage on one side and you lose a coolant tank, you'll be able to cross-feed from the other side and still provide the RCS with the coolant it needs. We'll probably use the same coolant tank for the weapons as well. The weapons array is going to be probably around about here in this wider section that we've got. So we'll have most likely the same coolant being used for that while it's there and all. I would think so, yeah, because you're basically taking that liquid fuel and you're immediately turning it into plasma and then accelerating it to ridiculous speeds. So we'll be outgassing from the top. Then we need to stick those three in a manifold. Unless just wondering actually whether or not we have one tank per RCS, just keep them stored in the same place. That does mean additional pumps though, which is probably less than ideal. Unless... no, that wouldn't work either. I was just wondering whether I make this tank here coolant specifically for the weapon system. But then it would need a separate pump if we're doing that. Which we can probably squeeze in, I suppose. Yep, a lot of pipes. And the water storage tanks are going to be here. So we've got some empty space up in the nose, so basically all of that there will probably be water storage tanks. That's right next to where the hydroponics will be, so if all of this is growing space, then everything behind that wall will be water tanks, which we'll also use for drinking water as well. But the actual water recycling room will be all the way up here at the back, so we're going to have to pipe that water down through the sides and then back to where it needs to go. It's going to be a lot of plumbing. But that's the fun part. Potentially, yes. I don't think so, AJ. mean, deuterium is heavy hydrogen. Just working out the best way to manifold this. So this guy essentially is the same as these ones, where we're going to have the refueling loop from down underneath. We're going to have the return loop from the boil off, and then the return loop from unspent fuel and or coolant. So I think, yeah, these are probably going to need to be rotated. Not that it really matters. Well, we will scale and position things once we start building the meshes properly. They're certainly not that right now. Yeah, so from a maintenance perspective as well, we need the player to be able to access all of these pipes. We can't just bury them in the wall in places where you can't get to them. And you know, ideally we want them to be snaking all around you. You know, when you're going down these maintenance tunnels, obviously, you know, you want to be surrounded by maintenance-y stuff. So the more visible they are, the better. Yeah, so we're definitely using electrolysis for creating oxygen from water. So there's no reason why we can't do that with waste products as well. Oops. Okay, this is going to be a crazy amount of cable piping. Right, so if we have the supply feeds coming up through the floor, and they're going to be coming from way down under here, so they'll have to come up through this cavity here, because that's a cavity underneath. So that's where our scoop hardware is going to be. So it needs to come from the scoop hardware through the cavity that we've got there, and then up into here where the tanks things are. Okay. So we have room for all of that. It's just need to make sure that we're making the cabling accessible. So if that cabling is damaged, or piping rather, is damaged, then you need to be able to get to it to fix it. Hey astronauts, yeah, does it not show the chat replay in on YouTube? To be honest, I would never call myself a streamer or anything, so I don't have any of the usual streamer tools. Oh, okay. All right, I'll look into that then. No specific reason, Oni, no. I mean, yeah, we could easily put fuel scoop hardware on these leading edges. I guess the only reason I haven't is because we're going to be running commodities through there. And that just seemed a more sensible place to have it, because it's right below where the main tanks are for the reactor. There's a lot of tankage in this part of the ship, so having the fuel scoop there is just less piping. But that said, there will be tanks within the engine pods, so they will need to be catered for as well. I don't know yet, Anasi. We'll have to wait and see when we actually get to that point. Let's unhide some of this a minute. Definitely an ASCII, yes. So one of the things I want to do in the technical manual is to do a very detailed render of the ship without any rooms or hull or anything. So it's literally just a weird kind of like a neurological net kind of. If you ever see like a diagram of the human body that doesn't have anything other than just a few organs and the nervous system and that sort of stuff, I want that diagram for the ship. It's going to look very cool. Just making sure these are all on the right levels. Yeah, so when we turn all that off, we end up with just the hardware, which is particularly cool. Yeah, so we want to get to the point where literally everything is all joined up together and all the cabling is where it needs to be. But in this case, we need to sort out the size of these tanks. Yeah, definitely on Inoni. On the military vessels, we'll have like triple redundancy everywhere where possible. They're going to be very, very tough ships to kill. These science vessels aren't as redundancy heavy. Let's make this one coolant. The more I look at this arrangement, I think the more I'm favouring the idea of just extending these tanks. Like if we're using them, like if we're using the coolant for the weapons, then we may as well just make a bigger coolant tank. And I'll see what that actually looks like volume-wise, because I don't think we need as much coolant as we're preparing for. That's probably an excessive amount of coolant. Potentially, yeah. Alright, that's going to reduce the amount of pipes slightly. So we've got so refueling, boil off and return. Yeah, the FTL will have its own tanks, so we'll have the same thing, probably in these arms here somewhere. So the return goes to there. The fueling comes from underneath. Yeah, well, there's no reason why we can't use the coolant for essentially everything on this side, which means the pump is pumping into a manifold. So we need pipes down there, so let's actually put them in while we're here. We don't have a lot in the way of room on this side, so I'm tempted to run them down the wall on this side. We're going to use this cavity here for commodity tanks for sickbay. So things like oxygen tanks and things we'll put in there. If you're wondering why there's a cavity there. Yeah, so obviously we've got a tank full of cryogenic fluid, and if left unattended, that cryogenic fluid is just going to gas out and eventually explode, because there's only so much gas these things can hold. So we need burst valves in order to vent overboard. Now, fortunately, the outer hull's right here, so we are literally right against the outer hull. So we will have venting overboard if we ever have any kind of pressure issue on the tanks. So the final emergency feature with those will be, if those burst valves blow, then you're basically losing the entire contents of the tank out into space, which protects the ship but empties the tank. So it turns a really, really bad day only into a slightly bad day. Yes, it definitely would. I suppose it's no different to the ullage thrusters on the SpaceX Starship. They're now using ullage gas as RCS rather than active RCS. But yeah, I imagine it would be somewhat similar. I imagine you'd still rather that than the tank exploding, though. Yeah, well, the ship will be venting anyway, because the amount of power you're generating, if you're generating more power than you're using, then obviously that excess energy has to go somewhere. So it will just vent plasma overboard in that case. So we need to make sure we've got an exhaust vent for the reactor as well. So if you've got the reactor turned up full and the FTL's not on, then you're not using that power, so we're just going to be just venting plasma unnecessarily into space. But we'll have that largely automated, so as soon as the reactor detects that it's generating more than it needs, it will just automatically vent that. And we'll have some kind of warning on the UI, like X percentage over generation or something like that. We'll think of a good word for it. Yeah, exactly, AJ. And I guess that's the point, isn't it? I mean, we're designing these ships to be real, and as such, we need to think about the real world problems. So, there are considerations we need to take into account, as if it were a real ship. I guess if we do our due diligence on that and make sure that everything is catered for as much as possible, then the simulation is as accurate as it possibly could be, because we've literally thought of everything at that point. Yeah, I think when we start building trading vessels, which is the plan for the third DLC. So first DLC is basically exploration, meeting new aliens, meeting the big bad, yada yada yada. DLC 2 is a war with that big bad, and then DLC 3 is rebuilding after the war. But part of basically the main thrust of DLC 3 is going to be owning and running your own shipping company. So you're basically like Space FedEx. And the idea with that is you get bigger and better and more capable shipping vessels as your company grows. Yeah, basically truck sim in space. So it would be great if the first initial vessels that you start with, one can't be FTL. So I like the fact you're basically stuck in the Sol system until you've upgraded to an FTL capable ship. But also have some of the old trading vessels be really old and janky. So they're rusty, they're broken, they're always failing, and you have to work your way through all the jank before you get to, brand new, polished, off the production line ships. I think that could be a lot of fun. Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, that's a good point. Future armor simulator. Actually, this needs manifolding as well, doesn't it? Right, okay, so let's run these pipes along this wall, and we'll make this cavities. So did I do that already? No. What's that? Oh, that's the engineering room. Right, yeah, so if we cut cavities into this wall here, then we can run all those pipes up through here, which means essentially they're kind of at head level. Or no, I suppose it makes more sense. I mean, we could run them on the outer skin, but then they are a little bit exposed, so yeah, if we run them down there, because we definitely need the player to have visibility and access to them. Yeah, we've had lots of people asking about colony sims and things. There'll be an element of that with DLC 3 because post-war, humanity begins expanding into the galaxy. So we start building up settlements on Proxima Centauri. We start all the Earth-like worlds that we've discovered, which are unclaimed by other species. We then start to populate those worlds and start to build colonies there. So part of DLC 3, and the whole reason you're running a shipping company, is you are supplying those fledglings of societies with all the cargo they need. So you can have an impact on the development of those settlements by choosing which one you do the most of the supplies to. It's an indirect effect on it. So it's not going to be a colony sim in the sense that you're choosing what to build, but you can affect the growth by choosing what to supply or how often to supply. So you could completely ignore one colony and focus on another one, and the one you ignore won't grow as quickly. Something like that. We're not intending to make any kind of colony sim. It's kind of like beyond the scope of what it is we're doing. We want people out exploring the galaxy, not creating a farm. Unless that farm is on a starship, in which case, go for it. Yeah, maybe. I've always liked the idea of just firing trash into the sun. Okay, that should work. We're going to have to make sure we have lots of labels on these. Yeah, like rear RCS, or like port, aft RCS, feed, supply, things like that. Just so it's obvious what those pipes are actually for. Yeah, I think you need something like 12 Jupiters for it to become a star. It's nowhere near enough mass in the solar system. I'm just trying to work out where to put the manifolds for this. Because if we're using a single large coolant tank, then we've got coolant feed for this RCS, and this RCS, and the weapons platform. Then all three of those, so that's 3 supply pipes and then 3 return pipes. So we'd need a massive manifold for this. Just wondering whether it's better to use that than just multiple ports on this, because on the Magellan one, if I can find the right deck and spot, where are we? Let's just turn all this on. That one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. Right, that should give us stuff. Yeah, so what we're building right now is essentially all this stuff. So we've got our chiller, and you've got your main fuel feed going into the chiller there. So that's basically the refueling tank, the refueling pipe. You've got the flow back into the storage tank, so that's your chilled outflow there. And then for the return the return from the reactor and the boil off are both coming in either side. Now obviously we've designed these chillers specifically to have 3 inputs, but if the other chillers have a lot more in the way of inputs, then it might actually serve us to make a manifold instead, and then just have a single input on the chiller and a single output, because the manifold's handling the merging of all those pipes. And then we don't have quite so much spaghetti going into these. YouTube's playing up. Yeah, because otherwise we've got so if those are our 3 returns plus boil off, yeah, so we'd have 5 inputs into the chiller. So it's probably better if we take all 5 of the input pipes, make a manifold that they all connect to, and then just have that connected to there. Which means we'd have the same here as well. Well, -1 actually, wouldn't we? Because we don't have a return from the weapons for this one. So we'd have refuel, boil off. Oh wait, no, 2. Yeah. Forward RCS, aft RCS, boil off, and refuel. So that would have 4. And that would have 5. Yeah, boil off, RCS, RCS, weapons, refueling. Yeah, so that's all the input pipes we'd need. So then we need so two pipes need to go down this side. One for there, one for the weapons. And then we need one for there. The return can just come around the back there. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to use this outer area here for just holding all of the commodity pipes. So rather than actually running it through the outer skin, because we've got a fair amount of vertical space just here. Now I'll have a handrail that's just attached to about there. And we'll probably stick the other handrail just on the wall there. So yeah, so if we were to move these over to here instead, then we've got a lot more room now to vertically stack however many pipes we need. Yeah, which means you're going to be walking through them all. Which does fit the rule of cool. I'm going to create a path and then attempt to run the pipes along that path. So if we just grab that edge and we do the same here. This won't be exact, but it will be enough to see whether the idea works. Right, so that's the path that the pipes need to follow. So if we weld that up to a single path, and then we can actually do pipe along path. If I can remember how. Yeah, that one. So the outside diameter would be 10. Okay, that worked. Yeah, so the ship has in its innermost layer, where's one I've actually done? Here's one. So the innermost layer is inch thick titanium, and it's well, it might not be this. Someone suggested a better material, and I've forgotten what it was now. I need to research it again. But we started off saying it would be a titanium gold alloy. There was a thing called TI3AU, which was 3 parts titanium, 1 part gold, and they were using it for like medical implants and things. It's like the hardest alloy there is. So something like that as the ultimate skin of the pressure vessel that makes up the ship. And then on top of this inch-thick titanium gold alloy, there would be a 2 to 3 inch thick hull plating, so the actual armor that goes on top. And then within the cavity, so this is the inner cavity where all the rooms would be, and then you've got this cavity space in between all the walls. So the entire ship is surrounded by 0.5 meters worth of just air. And that will have insulation material in it, which is like, if you imagine sort of a bubble wrap type material filled with gel. If for any reason a micrometeorite gets through several inches of armor plating and an inch of titanium gold alloy, then if that blister is punctured, then when that gel is exposed to vacuum, it practically instantly hardens into a really solid material, thus sealing the puncture hole that was just formed. So to an extent, it will self-heal any small holes by virtue of that material just expanding to fill that space. But yeah, it's going to be a pretty tough ship. Someone was talking about this before, and if you think about the ISS, I mean, the ISS has been hurtling around the Earth at like 7 kilometers per second for several decades now, and it's still there, and it has like millimeter thin steel as its outer hull. I don't know whether there's even steel, to be honest, but yeah, the ISS has like paper thin skin, and it hasn't been crushed or punctured or broken by anything. So take that really, really weak tin can that's been there for decades and has survived perfectly fine, and then consider something like this, which has got literally inch thick titanium around it and hull plating on top. I think you're pretty safe to say that you don't need to worry about micrometeorites quite so much. Oh, that was it, AJ. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we will be routing those pipes along there like that. Obviously, we will need to colour them accordingly. So what do we have here? So we've got if we do maybe do the coolant one on top, because there's going to be 3 of those, isn't there? So we've got coolant for the RCS, we've got coolant for the weapons, yeah, then the return, and the return, and of course then we'd have fuel and return. These pipes don't necessarily need to be this big, but well, then again, they are supposed to be insulated, so that's a 10 centimeter diameter pipe. So what's that? That's 4 inches. Yeah, so we'd need coolant in, coolant out for the RCS, coolant in, coolant out for the weapons, fuel in, fuel out for the RCS. So that's all the pipes we'd need going to the front. And obviously we'll take those up and over the top where needed. And then in this direction, so we need, yes, we don't need the top two. So if we say the top two's for the weapons, then we don't need that here. So let's cut that one there. And that one as well. Yeah, okay, so we've got the extra two pipes coming forward because of the weapons, and then the aft section only needs those. Oh yeah, and Skylab. Actually, the pipework situation is a bit easier at the front, because the return chillers are going to be there. Let's just pop these in this layer so that they're duplicated on the other side. Yeah, see, this is what we want to see. We want to see a ship that's built entirely of just pipes and hardware. These aren't necessary now, at least not at the moment. I think we need stretch dude anymore. Right, that's better. Cleaned it up a bit. So given that all the feeds are along there, I guess we need to have that go the other way. Or even just straight up for now. Yeah, we're going to need some kind of cable bridge, or pipe bridge rather. So if we bring that in, oh, that's awkward. Right, yeah, there's a floor there, so we can't really go any higher. But that's our height limit. Okay, so if we put the manifold here for the coolant, let's borrow that square. Right, so if the pump is pumping to a manifold, then we need 3 outputs. Yeah, it would have to be 3, wouldn't it? Because we've got yeah, let's just rotate this one around. Okay, so those 3 pipes essentially need to populate 3 of these. So the most obvious way of doing this, I think, is coming up this cavity through here and have it go over the ceiling down to there. So yeah, so these guys all need to go through the wall. Yeah, we could do. I mean, there's not a lot of room under there. I think I'm trying to avoid using the cavity as much as I can. There's going to be another skin on top of these ribs running down the side here. There will be lightning holes cut through them, but all of this is packed with insulation material. So really, all the pipes and everything needs to be on the inner edge. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so we put that down to the middle, be there. Move that over a bit. Yeah, maybe something like that. So we can come up there quite safely, and the only height restriction we have is actually the outer hull. So all 3 of those can run all the way up the wall, and we'll make sure that they are visible through the wall, because we'll cut holes in it. And all 3 of these can then just go like that. After a fashion. Maybe a bit less than that. That'll do, something like that. Right, so we output the pump into a manifold, that splits it into our 3 coolant lines. They run above the ceiling. Probably bring it down a bit as well, just to make it something you got to duck under. Something for Scotty to knock himself out on. Yeah, and then we need So supply, supply, return, return. Yeah, the issue we have with going along the inside is we get issues like this where it comes to an end and where they're actually needed is over here. And we have the same at this side as well. So we've got sections where it ends, and then along here, oops, and again it ends. So we're constantly having to snake our way as it staggers down. Whereas if we use the outer edge, we've got this smooth curve which just goes all the way around the outside. And then this is where they're needed, on this side. Apart from the weapons one, that'll be over here somewhere, but we can bring that up and over as required. In fact, let's chop that in a sec. Yeah, to be honest, that one that I chopped, hang on, let's unchop them again a minute. God, I just had a thought. Right, so if we make the top one the weapons coolant supply, because that needs to go up and over there somewhere. So let's make that this end one. So that one actually doesn't need anything that end. And then we have the return from the weapons. Maybe we'll have that down lower. Yeah, so actually we can use that one as the supply, the coolant supply. Yeah, that works actually, because if I split that one down the middle, something like that. Right, so we've got weapons coolant in, And then we've got rear RCS coolant in. And then we'd need forward RCS coolant in. So we can get rid of all of that. Just extend that out a little bit. That'll do, close enough. Right. So that's the 3 feeds taken care of. It should have been mirrored exactly on that side. Okay, then we've got two returns that are coming back from the RCS and the weapons. So those returns need to come up and over in line with this. So there's going to be a lot of up and over on this side as well. So that completes the coolant loop for the forward ones, and then the back one just needs that out pipe going across. Okay, so that's the feed. Those 2 are returns. So if we don't know, let's just cut that there maybe. That one. So feed, return, return. And then we've got so this one's a feed, and a return comes from there, so we can probably maybe hijack that one a little bit. Yeah, so we make that one the return. That one's the feed, so they've got the 2 feeds going in, coolant and fuel. That's return, return, and that's return from the forward one. So it means we need another manifold with only 2 outputs on it, and that needs to connect down there, maybe there, or maybe we move that one over. Yeah, so I think when we do this properly, we'll move the coolant one over here. Which would make more sense. But for now, just have the fuel one on this side. But we may as well copy the whole thing and then just move it around a bit as we need it. So we grab all of that, copy it across there. Need those ones, so it's a smaller manifold. That's for that one. Just color it in accordingly. Right, so if I break that one, I think that's the one we were using, wasn't it? Yeah, so we don't need that running in one direction, it can run in two directions. Just bring that down to about there. Same with that one. bit of overlap, but that'll do. Right, so we've got weapons coolant feed, forward RCS feed, for a rear RCS feed, weapons return, RCS return. So that's all of those. Then we've got the forward RCS feed, the aft RCS feed, and the forward RCS return. So that should be all the pipes that are actually needed in order to do the RCS and the weapons, in terms of coolant and fuel at least. And that should again be mirrored on this side automatically. Although not quite in the right place by the looks of things. Oh yeah, looks like I shoved the fuel tank through the wall. I'll fix that afterwards. Probably not CSI. We don't want to overcomplicate the system too much. So as much as we're going to like individual pipe level simulation, we want to keep the actual hardware itself as predictable as possible. So you have some pipes, you have a pump, and then you have a device at the end that it's feeding. We want to kind of keep it that simple. So if we make that the weapon feed there, and which one was the weapon return? It was 1, 2, third one down. Might might adjust that a little bit, just so we don't have too much of a tangle with our pipes. But yeah, so we've got coolant going to the weapons, coolant coming from the weapons to go back into the tank. Then we've got coolant to the RCS, coolant from the RCS, fuel to, fuel from. So fuel to is that one, fuel from is that one. Yep, so then we need just copy these down here. Actually, we probably need these. Yeah, if we put the return at the back. let's just call that the RCS return for the fuel. Then we want return for the coolant. And again, we'll do it up and over on the ceiling and then run it down the wall. Something like that anyway. I shan't be too precious about these. I keep seeing the stream go offline then come back on again. I hope it's actually working. Good, good. That'll do. Just kind of getting an idea in my head of where the where all the clusters of cables and things, pipes need to go. Like I'll probably drop that one down actually, and rather than having a gap. Why not do exactly that? Right, there we go. Makes more sense. Saying that, of course, that side of it needs to be up the top. Yeah, makes more sense. Okay, so we're starting to see how everything's going to connect, which is nice. See, that needs to go t'other way. Yeah. I'll try and make it as hazardous for head banging as possible. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fun. Yes, we have an onboard ship AI. She's called Ava. Ava will have a very large mainframe in the server room under the bridge. There isn't a duck button, but yeah, we do need one. Actually, no, there is a crouch button. You can use that. Again, when we do this properly, we'll make all this like tidy and properly routed. So when you say AI, do you mean like an LLM or something? In which case, I don't think there is an LLM that exists yet that fits what we want to do. Because we want, if we're ever going to use an LLM like to drive NPCs and things, then it needs to be a local model that is lightweight and trained on our data. So it needs to be something that can run locally and isn't going to absolutely destroy the GPU. I got bags of headroom there, shouldn't be a problem to bring that across. Yeah, as much as we will run that up through the ceiling, we don't want to like get to the point where you can't reach it. So some things, and this is true for the Magellan as well, the pipe will be out of reach under normal circumstances, but you'll be able to repair it from here. So like this, and this will all be one solid piece. So if you remove the pipe from here, the whole run disappears. And when you put a new one in, like that will highlight green to show you that's where it's going to go. Realised I've put all these ones inside the wall, which is no good. So I suppose I need more manifolds on this side. I'll just leave those ones just hanging in space where they are. We'll probably have the coolant and fuel returns coming from the opposite side, so they'll run across through the hardware, then back around from that side, but we'll leave it there for now. Similar, this one runs through the device and out the other side. Right, so I guess these need to come down to there. So I probably have all of the inputs coming in on the side, including the fuel. I should just lazily extend that out a minute. Do. Right, so we've got 1, 2, and 3 coming in there. We've got the 4th because we've got a return from the boil off, and then the 5th was the refueling pipe. Fueling one, and then we've got one, two, so boil off, 2 returns, and the refueling. So, yeah, that one needs one more underneath as well. Right. Almost there. Oh yeah. And I need a pipe going in as well, don't I? Maybe we'll have that go in the back. Right, so chiller in and chiller in. That connects up with there. That one connects up under there somewhere. Have a good one, CSI. Actually, it makes more sense if we do that one for the boil off, because then we're not having to cross pipes quite so much. Stick that one there, that one there. Okay, good. And then we also need the actual chiller feed. Let's just do that for now. Got to do a bit of spaghetti with that one, I think, to get it routed around, because the stairs coming down there. That is a good question, Danger Mouse. I think what I get the most pleasure out of is working on the galaxy stuff usually. So I'm quite excited about planetary surfaces and how we're going to do that and how that's going to look. I really want to be roaming around like the highest fidelity planetary surfaces we can muster. So yeah, so that's going to be a big deal for me, for sure. I think, if anything, that's probably the thing that I'm really the most excited about. And I think secondary to that, I'm also really excited about getting into the astrobiology and designing plants, or rather designing a system for designing plants, where we take the conditions of the star and the conditions of the planet, and then we work out what unique things a particular bit of foliage or whatever needs to have to survive in that environment, so that when you do scans, you're getting real kind of scientifically plausible data back, and it will say, you know, the leaves on this plant are this color because of this reason, rather than just because it looks good. It'll be science driven, and I think that's part of the joy of the exploration side of things is learning that information, you know, learning about an alien world and why it is the way it is. You know, why that plant has black leaves. Seem to have an extra pipe. Where did that come from? Oh, of course. We need our boil-off pipe for this thing. So, okay. Gonna have to overlap that slightly. Boil off. I'll stick that on the innermost one when we do it properly, so we don't have that overlap. That's going to be an awkward one to route, so I'll leave that for later. Right, I think that's it. Let's have a quick look. Yeah, I think that's pretty much exactly what we needed for the plumbing. Yeah, so then we need a large manifold, or 3 large, well, probably more than 3, a number of large manifolds underneath the tanks, because that's where we'll be sucking gases in, and then they need to pipe up to these feeds here on both sides, and also these 3 here. Really, those ones need to loop up and down. Okay, yeah, so that one then, that's basically going straight into the reactor. As is that one. Okay. Right, yeah, then these 2 on the end, and that one as well, I guess. Let's take these where they need to go. So those are the refuel feeds. So we've got 3 coolant, 2 argon or xenon, or whatever we're using, 1 deuterium, 1 helium-3. Yeah, so those are the only 2 tanks that are using deuterium and helium-3. So the green ones are just helium, and the light purpley ones are going to be some inert gas. I think what we'll do for the engines, and this is another job that needs doing actually, we need to, as much as we have mathematically kind of modelled the volume of plasma required for a certain wattage, we also need to start looking at the radial dimensions of engines and how much thrust they actually provide, so that for ships like this, obviously we need to work out, you know, practically how big are those engines, and how many do we need. So we don't want to have like single giant engines. We want to have clusters of smaller engines, both for redundancy and for the look of the thing. And I think I'm tempted to make them completely modular, in the sense that they all share, or rather they don't share, fuel and coolant tanks. They have their own feeds, which means I can build the storage tanks as part of the engine nozzle. So you'll have the tanks at the back, the acceleration coils, and then obviously the nozzle there. So we can have all of our pipe infrastructure coming up and splitting off into a manifold in the engine pod, which then backfills the 6 tanks per pod. So we'd have something. Are they not? Did I not make them into components? No, I didn't. So that would be the middle. Yeah, so the engines would be somewhat like that. Not unlike a modern day rocket booster, where like the body of the booster is basically just fuel tank. The challenge with this, of course, is making this space navigable by the player, because if we cover the whole thing in fuel tanks, then there's nowhere for the player to stand. Yeah, so something like that. And that means we can have lots of internal plumbing kind of wrapping around the engines to add a lot more visual interest, and really make them look like, you know, proper pieces of hardware. And again, have those pipes and cables and things actually relevant and actually doing a job. It makes them multi-part components, so you're not just looking at this is an engine, you're looking at, you know, this is the fuel manifold and this is one of the fuel pipes, and if those things break then the engine stops working, that sort of thing. So I think we'd have, in terms of efficiencies, we'd have a single fuel feed and a single coolant feed, along with the power. And then we'd manifold that off. Yeah, definitely, AJ. And I want it to be predictable. Like, I want the hardware to be predictable and make sense. But at the same time, you know, I do want there to be a learning curve. You know, we want it to be, you know, difficult. You know, if you've never done engineering before, or you've never been through the engineering tutorials, you know, you want to be able to look at all these pipes and go, like, I literally have no idea what any of this does. And yet, someone who plays engineering a lot and is familiar with the systems can walk onto a ship and go, yeah, I know what that is, I know what that does, I know where that pipe goes. You know, it's that real world knowledge that's useful within the game. Yeah, difficult but achievable, complex but predictable. So another thought occurs, actually. We've got the FTL capacitors, obviously. I'll probably run them up this this gantry, because we've got a lot of hollow space either side of that, so that's probably the best place for those. And it gives us some like heatsink detail on the actual support pylons, just to make them, again, a bit more visually interesting, and hardware that's not just there for the sake of it. Yeah, so we're definitely approaching the kind of thing that I want to be able to render for this, where it starts to look like, as I said, like a nervous system kind of diagram, where there's just stuff everywhere. Okay, so that. So yeah, see, this stuff's going to have to run up through the main stairwell at the back there. So all the supply pipes are all going to be wrapped around the stairs, which is going to be nice, because as you traverse the stairwell, you're just going to be surrounded by pipes and cables and things all over the place, which is going to give it that real kind of engineering feel, which is what we want. Yeah, that's not a bad point, to be honest, Danger Mouse. If you're actually watching the ship being built, then you're at an advantage, because you know aspects of the design that people who didn't watch it being built wouldn't know. Yeah, so beyond this, I think it's the electrical side of things which is going to be slightly more difficult to to position. I think we're okay for fluids. I think all of the fluid pipes and everything are pretty much logically positioned now. If we very quickly just bring that up a minute, because we could just pop in our water tanks. So again, so all of that space is going to be dedicated to growing plants. So if we stick our water tanks through there, the good thing with a water tank is that it can be funny shaped. It doesn't need to be like with high pressure tanks like these. Obviously, they need to be high pressure tank shaped so that they have that structural integrity. A water tank is just a water tank, so it can pretty much take up this entire space, and probably will, for that matter. In fact, why don't we try doing exactly that? If we do 55, grab that face, undo it, and then paste it back. So I've given a bit of breathing room around it so we can have some kind of support for the tank. And then we need to know where is our top limit. That's there. So again, if we leave a 5 centimeter gap, then we can chop the top off. No, we're definitely not going to model slosh. There's only so much we can do. Yeah, to be honest, if this is our water tank at the front here, and we're putting the water tank right in the nose, although to be honest, you know, a lot of the ship's mass is going to be contained within engineering, so having all the water tanks at the front does actually balance out the center of mass. We can, yeah, we can logic our way around that, I reckon. See you, Data. Have a good one. Let's just chop off bits we don't need from this tank. So that would be the size of our water tank, which very helpfully SketchUp tells us is just shy of 169 meters cubed. I wonder what that is in tonnage. 169 cubic meters of water in tons. 169 tons, of course. Derp. Yeah, so we're carrying 169 tons of water. Don't think we've used that color yet. Yes, Festus, they are. Yeah, so we're going to need... Gonna need some pipes coming out from there, which is essentially feeding the whole ship. We'll probably use some of the space at the front there, because the deck gets shorter and shorter as you go up because it's on a slope. We'll probably pick the point where you can no longer stand up straight, and then beyond that point we'll have the pump hardware and everything that's pumping water where it needs to go. Obviously that water is feeding the plants and the hydroponics, but that's also the crew's drinking water, and that will be recycled up here somewhere. So we definitely need pipes coming to and from that. I guess we also need, I suppose it would be nice if we had, when we do our technical manual, we have like the electrical diagram with all the electrical systems, and then we have like the fuel and the coolant, and then we have like the plumbing diagram that literally just shows you where all the taps are. That could be quite cool. And yes, there will be 3 streams a week. So one of the things I found working on the shuttles over the past week or so is it kind of highlighted the fact that there are aspects to development which we need to do, and some of those things need to come sooner rather than later. But we also have some set patches that we have put together logically, because we want to do things in a logical order to make sure that we're not just developing the game just on a whim. We're just, let's do this feature next, or let's do this feature because we want to. We're trying to plan it out logically so that the features that we're developing are are always precursors to something else which is needed in the future, so that we're not finding ourselves stuck, that we are trying to build something that has a precursor system we haven't finished yet, or we don't want to dig a hole for ourselves, essentially. But there are some pretty big game systems that I want to get a head start on, so we figured that it would be good to do that on Friday evenings. So we'll add that extra stream on Fridays so that I can work on entirely random stuff which is needed for the game but not necessarily part of a current patch. So things like the shuttles or planetary landings, or just any other random thing that I just want to do, I suppose. It's it's all stuff that's needed for the game, but I find, like, from a developer's perspective, when you're grinding every day on stuff you have to do, you lose some of that inspiration and some of that, I guess, some of that love for game dev. I mean, I went into game dev as a hobby, it was a passion, and a lot of the funner stuff in the game, like chairs you can wheel around, are things which were born of me just coming up with some random crazy idea because it was amusing and I thought I'd just run with it. So we want Fridays to essentially be that. It's stuff which enhances the game and stuff that's needed, but stuff that I feel like I want to work on, so it's a bit of a break from the routine, a break from the grind, just to work on something fun. Hopefully that explains it. So yes, we'll do so fleshing out the Magellan class on Wednesdays, just random stuff on Fridays, and then Sundays we'll just continue to work on the Caravella as we are. So it's basically I'm streaming for one day, having a day off, streaming for the next day, having a day off, and so on and so on and so on. Should be fun, I think. Yeah, so the Friday streams are just something where I can just, chill and work on random stuff. Yes, and as Claire quite rightly points out, the stuff I do on stream isn't stuff that I'm working on during the week. So during the week, Monday to Friday, and Saturday to Sunday usually, I'm working on the game. I'm working on whatever patch is currently in the patch cycle. The stuff I do on streams is generally unrelated to that. So, like, the Caravella is not. It's something for the future. It's not something that's part of a patch. But it's all things that need doing. But yeah, so for the rest of the week, I am still working on the game proper. And I'm glad you guys are looking forward to it and coming along for the journey. And to be honest with you, streaming helps keep me focused on the game. I guess when you're doing the same grind day in, day out, it can turn into a grind. But when you're having to break that grind up with streaming and interacting with the community and sharing what you're doing, it's a huge motivator, definitely. And it helps keep me honest, it helps keep me on track. It's all the good things. So streaming good. And on that happy note, we've just hit time for this stream. So yes, I shall see you all on Wednesday for more Magellan Class stuff, and then on Friday for whatever it is we're going to do on Friday. I don't know yet, and that's the exciting part. Right, have a great week ahead, everyone, and I shall see you on Wednesday. Bye for now.